Good morning, everyone from Boston, wherever you may be. It may be a different time zone. It's a little early for WebinARTs, but a wonderful opportunity to be quite fresh at 15 degrees above zero. In any event, one of the warmest parts of our adult life has been the gallery and exhibitions of Marguerite Robichaux and Randy Johnston. Recently, I counted, and this is the ninth pairing of their works together, done haphazardly, I must admit, the first time. And then it became a tradition which has continued to enrich the lives of, I think, all of us. So this morning, we're going to spend some time talking with good friends about Marguerite's work. And I wanted to begin with a quote from Brother Thomas. The difference between the process of art and the process of craft is that in art, the chief characteristic is joy. And although we have a variety of titles from Marguerite's books and catalogs, I would say that joy should certainly have been included in any number of them. So let's begin today with the cover piece. And I love the notion, maybe the word grand is good, but at 88, I like old. And finally, tree. So, Marguerite, this is the cover of the catalog. It's an extraordinary painting that has gotten very positive response. And I'd love for you to sort of start talking about the environment that you live in, both physically and spiritually.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Bernie, this tree has been a part of my life for 40 years now. It's along the side of the road near my home. And for a few wonderful days in the middle of May, it's this wonderful white cloud of blossoms. The story behind this tree from the locals is that it started its life closer to the Quebec border than I live. A farmer who supplied vegetables and firewood for a big sporting fish and game camp had this tree. And when he got older and wanted to move in closer to town, he dug the tree up and brought it with him. Um, it's in its many forms. It's just a wonderful presence sitting in the landscape with a bit of urbanism on the road right in front of it. Um, because I'm in the woods mostly, individual trees will speak out to me. For instance, if they are in full bloom, if they're turning in foliage in the fall, and they have stories to tell. This tree probably has maybe 100 years old, but there have been a lot of history that's passed by this tree, and that's just something that, if not in words, then in paint, I would like to try to preserve and visit every so often. A close friend of mine who was a Maine poet and musician wrote a poem years ago about a tree, and in the title of the poem was "If That Old Pine Could Speak." And I don't know that the poem was ever written down. I know he used to recite it, and friends knew it, and I couldn't find the full stanzas to this poem, but the essence of it was what this tree observed over the years and decades um, of what went on around it. And I just think that's a wonderful way to observe the landscape.
Beautiful, beautiful. Liz, I'm sure you've seen the tree.
Yes.
uh, a number of times, with and without martini. And I'd love your what response to it. I don't know if Marguerite showed you, but I gave her a martini pin
I have it
when she
on.
was here.
I
Oh,
have it on today.
okay, good. I think I have one on as well. So, but separate from our drinking joint enjoyment, your response to the tree.
Yes. Well, again, good morning to everyone, and thank you for including me in this August panel. It's always so exciting for me as a non-practicing artist, painter, to be able to talk about my dear friend's work because I'm already tearing up. I am so emotionally tied to her process and her landscape and what she does, and I have been privy to it in the 20 years of friendship that we have shared. So not only do I know very intimately these subjects that she's painting, but I have also watched her interpret them. And with this tree, the other trees in the show, and previous paintings, I once wrote about how much I admired the way that Marguerite painted snow. And it's my classic response to her work, and she's so wry about it, but she said, I don't paint snow, I paint around it. And the way that the white of this tree just explodes off the canvas and pulls you in as a viewer, it just speaks to the way that Marguerite, as she talked about the affection that she feels for the world around her, that she is not an objective observer. She is completely subjective into this landscape, and she knows intimately not the tree in its budding beauty here, but when it loses its leaves and its fruit, and when it looks dormant and that nothing will become of it, and then it comes back round again, as she said, for 40 years. And again, that's the way that I feel that she paints the landscape with snow, is that she knows every inch of the terrain underneath it. So she knows every iteration, the every aching bud and blossom opening on this tree. So I feel that she brings that language to the work that she does with her brush and brings us into her world so beautifully.
Thank you so much. Mara, you've not seen the tree, and therefore, what is your perspective on this as a painting and as a teacher of art?
Do we have a solo shot of this? Did I
We
include that?
do, we
Could we
do.
look
So
at it in a solo? Yes.
that's it. There
Okay.
you go. Thank you.
Okay. I think that just gives the viewers a way of like getting up close to your screen as if you were getting up close to the painting. Of course, the scale is nothing. This is a 40-inch high painting. This is a statuesque tree in a statuesque painting. And and for all the metaphor that a tree has in it, for all the history, for all the loving attention that Marguerite has paid to this tree and its nuance, its soul, as it were. What I just want to talk about for a few brief moments is the excellence of the quality of paint in this tree. This background set up with the pale blue-gray sky, very thinly painted, and the trees behind it, both the more yellow to olive tone tree and the darker toned green trees, and the tinged and darkest forest underneath these beautiful white blossoms, are remarkably thinly painted and very painterly. You can see the drips, you can see the brush strokes, or just the movement of paint, the swaths of paint in here. So, and then the build up to the whites. And what I am struck by is just the beauty and nuance of the positive and negative space, and the quickness of the touch, the deftness of the touch in this painting. It's a cloud and it's a tree. It's a spirit and it's a place. And it's just so, like, it's rendered with panache but delicacy. And I find the balancing of those two things just superb in this painting.
Marguerite, if I were you, I'd just retire.
That
Yeah,
sounds
you don't have to paint
great.
anything else after this, as far as I'm
Right.
concerned.
That's a really very beautiful
Yeah.
description of it. And I love the phrase you use, the soul of the tree. The notion that one can create any object and let others introduce themselves to it and feel that that representation essentially gives the essence of the tree itself or of all trees is really quite beautiful. Rusty, your thoughts coming from Gainesville?
What? Am I in okay? I'm
You're
not
there. I see you.
okay. Good, because my phone is. I'm having to work off a phone. I apologize. Beautiful. I mean, it's the color contrast that Marguerite's able to achieve to make this a very dynamic feeling. To look at it, it seems rather simple, but then if in person, as you approach it, the coloration, the presence just really stands out beautifully in a way that you wouldn't expect. I mean, I'm always, as I walk by her paintings, sort of caught by surprise because you approach it and think, wow, the color, what beautiful. And then as you get closer to it, it just really captivates you. So an amazing technique that I guess that's the ideal, is to be brought in to engage with the work, but it certainly does that.
Wonderful. I think we've certainly done this soul of the tree or this particular tree justice. So, Caroline, if we could move to the next image and ask you if you wouldn't mind to just give a response to it, and then some of us will chime in.
Oh, well, I love how this piece, the framing, which I unfortunately have not been able to see in person since I'm not in Boston anymore, but I love how it really pops out of the frame, but also has this sinking in like a window. I love this ratio, this dark, moody. Obviously, this is probably, well, I would guess this is Louisiana and not
Yes,
Maine.
yes, it is.
Okay, good. I figured it had a very swampy, beautiful marsh, vibe to it. But I love that darkness contrasted with the framing. It completely changes the piece and gives this storybook depth that I just want to dive into. And I love how Marguerite, I noticed this in the last painting when Mara really pointed it out, how you use the sky to bridge to these lighter trees and how it gives this lifting up of them that gives a little bit more character and soul to that piece. Instead of landlocking it in the darkness, you bring it up into the light. It's really quite fun.
Marguerite, your thoughts of this piece, one, because place is obviously important to you, and at the same time, one would assume that others who see it may not ever have been there, but can generalize an experience from it.
Well, this image comes from years of fishing with my uncle on the backwaters and bayous of Louisiana. Sometimes with a cane pole and a worm and a cork, sometimes with a casting rod. But we would go out and fish and be surrounded by heat and humidity, of course, in Louisiana, but surrounded by these great cypress, tupelo um, trees that are just dripping into the bayou, dripping with water, but dripping with an essence that just sort of makes this surround. And the dripping paint is just sort of reflective of the way that kind of landscape feels. It's very much a part of my younger years, and the border around it is actually a piece of antique lace that I apply paint to and then press to the surface of the canvas over and over and over again. It's like a monoprint. And then I go back in and draw and paint on the image that has been printed. And I use it to frame the image. It brings the image up to the surface of the linen, but it also, directs the eye back into the distance where the cypress tree is, working back into the lace edge and then back into the painting. It kind of establishes an edge to the piece, the interior image that vibrates. And I like the idea of this piece with antique lace around it. It sort of sets it into a certain nostalgic mood, which is very much like Southern Louisiana to me.
So speak about 1991, which is when this painting is dated, and then the painting we looked at before, which is 2024,
Mhm.
and how you would describe your own journey artistically over 43 years.
Well, I a lot of the images remain the same to me. The trees, water, uh, sky, landscapes. I'm I'm over the years my work has gotten looser and then it gets tighter again and then it gets looser again. It's a way of seeing the landscape more than one direction or more than one state of mind basically. Um, but I don't see that much difference between these trees and drips and sky and the more recent wild apple tree.
Okay, so Mara, what about your sense of 43 years?
Well, the framing device here and the buildup of paint lace, sort of an intaglio kind of process around the edges, and framing is sort of radically structurally different than the piece we just looked at. But I think that attention to the trees, the atmosphere of the scene, the place, the sense of place, and the ability to work from dark to light, which is a classic. Rembrandt worked from dark to light, moving up the surface, which takes a great amount of technical skill and a lot of patience for the drawing between the layers in oil, not to get just a whole muddled middle. Again, it's a unique vision, it's a contemporary vision, but there are these hints of old master in her work that I love the back and forth for me.
Absolutely lovely way to say it. Can we
Bernie,
move on? Yes.
having fished in those areas myself, I, I can take the Spanish moss that's hanging down, the ripples on the surface, because it's often very quiet water under those trees, and yet a little ripple will send just what you see beneath them. I used to wade in those areas and looking out for cottonmouth moccasins and things of that sort. But there's a sense here of nostalgia for Marguerite. There's a sense of nostalgia for me too, because it really does capture the quietness and yet the screaming of nature all at one time. It's a very some people are very uneasy. I think if you were born and raised in New York City and went down and took one of those fishing trips, you really get uncomfortable because it is so quiet in a way and so engaging for natural things. But it really does grasp that feeling of being in the nature itself.
That's quite lovely, and thank you for the eyewitness account.
That's okay. I'm still alive.
I was wondering about that as well. Can we move on to the next image, please? Oh my. So what an extraordinary explosion. There's a small watercolor of the same tree, I think, in the exhibition. Marguerite, I'd love for you to talk about this particular tree, but also the sense of its absolute glorious beauty.
This color palette in this is it's not totally unusual for me, but most of my palette is pretty subdued. But there are some paintings where I love to just explode that color, that cadmium orange and cadmium red, and it's mesmerizing and it takes over the piece. It usually when I use that color, it's in a spot, a small space, a a foliage tree in a big landscape. But this tree sits outside my living room window at home in Maine, and I watch it over the course of the year. And for a week or so in early October, it's just fiery red, and it commands the landscape. I it's you can't it creates its own light basically. You can hardly look away from it. And it's something that calls to me that I just have to put down on canvas. You can't look past it.
I love it. Liz, have you been there and seen this tree lighted up?
Oh, of course I have. That is a view from our martini post. The exploding apple tree is on the road, and no martinis were involved in the viewing of that one. But having been so intimately acquainted, as I said, with this landscape and sharing time with Marguerite in her beautiful home, regarding the last painting, just the note in for me, what when I go back and track the work over the trajectory of our friendship and prior to is the palette. And I brought a young friend to the opening and was showing him around. And this tree, of course, commands the space. It draws the eye immediately. But then all of a sudden, my head started swiveling around, and I started seeing this orange red pop up in several of the other new works. And it was a new color for me. As Marguerite said, she very often uses it as a highlight. So it was so exciting to all of a sudden see this color emerge all around and emerge from the more, I mean, especially the palette of the last painting, the blue blacks and the deep greens that are so familiar to me. And Marguerite is always, she is a professional noticer, so she can find that color in the landscape. I've been antiquing with her, and she can find the beautiful pot in a pile of junk, and so she knows how to find the gem in the landscape.
Absolutely wonderful. Thomas wrote, each day is filled with continued discovery and goodness. And it would seem to me, Margaret, when you finally discovered this in the sense that you wanted to make it available to others through your painting, that it was a good day for all of us.
Well, thank you. And I had to squeeze some of those colors out of tubes of paint that have been sitting in my studio and haven't been used in a while. So it was,
But you did a good squeeze.
yeah.
Let's look at the next piece, please. So again, this is, and I occasionally will remark or call your attention to the date of the piece to realize that the exhibition is both recent work, 24, 25, but also pieces that have added meaning for Marguerite, both personally, historically, and it was her choice of curating the collection that is in the exhibition. But I'm going to ask Caroline for you just to respond to the piece. This is a small piece on birch.
This piece, as well as a lot of the others, and it's funny because it's only when I start talking about them do I really notice the, to me, the story that's being told in each one, how each element becomes, I mean, like especially this tree here becomes personified. It has this sense of movement, of wind. It just makes this little tree seem like it's going on an adventure. It just looks like he's going up this hill. I love the other characters in the back, how you have this orange and this blue, green, and green just dancing across the horizon line to give even more context to what could be going on. It kind of makes them a little mysterious, but I guess that's kind of how trees are. You know, they outlive us and they see so much. Um, that's kind of what really jumps out in each one of these for me.
Just as a brief aside and tribute to Caroline, the joy of working with you over these past few years and watching you or listening to you continue to see more clearly and articulate what you see has been an absolute joy for me and for the gallery. So I just wanted to thank you. It was a nice opportunity to do that. But it is very important. One of the best things that we do, which is not often enough, is ask staff members to take another staff member around, choose a particular work of art, and then talk about it. And then the act of speaking about the piece, you see it differently because you're experiencing it for someone else as well as yourself. And I loved what you just began by saying when you began talking about it, the painting came alive in a very different way for you. Rusty, your thoughts?
I just really love the way that the unique trees are framed by other trees or pieces of nature. the previous painting that we saw, the sugar maple, was framed by tall fir trees or some equivalent to that. Here there are some boulders in the background, but all that Caroline said, I think, is wonderful. The sense of a movement, the sky that is combined with this is all makes it into a scene that, in essence, I mean, it draws your attention to the tree, but it also, using natural surroundings, frames it in a way that brings your eye directly onto that tree. So the use of the background, natural trees, rocks, whatever it may be, is just, to me, is wonderfully sort of, as I say, frames the one tree and makes it stand out.
So, Mara, I'm going to ask you to speak about this and then speak about the next one because I don't want to miss what you have to say about both.
Okay. Well, I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the fact that this is on a birch panel, a smooth, hard surface. And how the paint sits on that surface is very different than what we've seen in the pieces prior to this. And so this movement, this dancing that Carolyn talked about and Rusty also commented on, this glide and slide on the diagonal, this rushing wind and dancing tree, just was put down quickly, almost calligraphically, onto the panel. And again, it's a level of finesse and dexterity that I find truly remarkable. I love the breadth that kind of speed and thinness of paint, and just nothing is overworked. It's just there. It's almost like a little miracle to me, because I could never do anything this fresh. Not that I'm a painter at all, but it's just fresh in a way that you often see work that's overworked, and surfaces that are overworked and clotted, which has its own beauty. But that dash, and I mean that in lots of senses of the word, that dash is completely captivating to me.
Bernie, I might say something about
Sure.
my process is my original medium was watercolor. And the oils, even the larger oils, I paint very much in the matter of a watercolor painting, where anything that's white or really a light value, that white is the surface of the canvas or of the birch panel. When I start a painting, I do a fairly extensive graphite drawing so that when I start dashing the paint on there, I don't paint over those spaces that I want to be white or light value. Because going back with opaque white paint over it changes the tone of the painting and the color of it too. And as Mara said, that dash of the red and on the ground is paint that I put down and wipe away quickly. So just using maybe paper towels or a painting rag or something. So it pulls up the lightness from behind the pigment itself. And the drips come from, like in watercolor, using a fairly thin paint. And I paint upright on the wall, so the paint drips, which sometimes I wipe away and sometimes I just leave the drips because that's what paint does.
I think it's incredibly useful for people to both experience the work as they see it, and at the same time to have some of the understanding of both process and the way you approach it, creating the image that they are sharing with you. Next image, please.
Okay. Well,
all right, Mara, you're out.
Well, we just heard it from the master herself. I mean, this is her original medium, and this reminds me so much of 12th century Zen calligraphy in its its delicacy, its restraint, its speed, its accuracy, and just that sort of haunting atmospheric perspective that happens at certain times of days and in certain lights, that I don't know, there's something when there's little color or light color and it melts away from you in a landscape when you're in the landscape or whether you're looking at somebody who masterfully captures it. And I just came back from the Sato Sea. So this kind of atmospheric perspective just
Right.
melting back across the horizon into infinity. I don't know, it speaks to the soul in a way that's almost ineffable.
Wow. So, Marguerite, I'm going to give you a chance for rebuttal.
Oh, I don't.
I think
This is
it's
this is
beautiful.
this is an early watercolor. It's almost monochromatic, except in the foreground, there's a little bit of warmth in that shadow at the base of the little rise that the trees sit on. And I know Mara has talked before about in my work, I will often center my interest, my main thing, right in the center of the canvas, which is really sort of a no-no for composition. But it's something that I want to show up, and so I stick it right in the middle of the format and work around it basically.
Liz, your thoughts?
Oh my gosh, I had never seen this piece before the show. And I just fell into it. You can almost see the foreshadow of my foot snowshoe prints across the foreground here. I know that landscape so well. I had the privilege and great opportunity to stay in Marguerite and her partner Walter's camp on her property, which has no electricity or running water. And I spent winters, a week up there hauling wood and water and traipsing around. I'm a big walker. I know these colors, these shadows. You can see where the ice is thinner in the foreground there. She so understands, again, it comes back, and I don't know why this is tearing me up so much, how much she understands the landscape under the cover of snow. That there is this almost, and spirit, of course, is the word that comes to it, but it is an intimate knowledge. You can feel the cold, you can feel the gloom, the impending dark, and yet there's a life force that just throbs in those blues and deep colors in the center of it's the heartbeat of the painting. And it is a miracle painting to me.
Caroline, you've grown up in a very different part of the world most of the time. How do you respond to this?
I love any small, intimate, sweet piece like this. It reminds me when the MFA had a Turner exhibition that I was so excited to go see, and it was amazing, and I was taken aback by the large pieces, but it's these small, intimate pieces like this. It reminds me of his pieces, and I was like, I love those even more than the big ones. It's I mean, how sweet and how just perfect each mark has been made. It's not overworked in the slightest. I love this raw watercolored edge in the corner there. I mean, it just takes you in. It's just what art does at its best. It just takes you to this place. It almost transcends what it is in itself, and I feel like I've fallen into it.
Lovely. And Rusty, you
It's a,
moved you moved here for the change of seasons.
yeah, I got all that snow now. It's lovely. No, I'm always amazed by what very good artists can do with watercolors. And you think, that it's sort of a loose or sloppy medium. It's not at all. And so I'm taken not only by the central image, but also by the background here. And a decision to have multiple lines. There's a straight line across the back. There's a line that rises to the right, another, and then the sky above. It reminds me a little of Hiromi, who's a Japanese photographer who takes pictures of water, the beach, for instance, and the incredible layers that one sees that on a quick look you don't, but on an engaged um, in-depth sort of observation, you get taken into layer after layer after layer, and it's so well accomplished here that you do have that wonderful foreground and even a little change, as you said, at the very front part of that. But it goes on and on. The depth of an Indian painting of sorts. You can go into the background, but obviously done with watercolors and therefore requiring a very deft hand not to mix those in a way that they mush up. They're very distinct, and yet they have that sense of distance and beauty to them.
Thank you. I had meant earlier on, Liz, when you spoke, to use another quote of Thomas's because I think it is a wonderful description of your friendship with Marguerite. The most enduring gift is the gift of friendship, such a blessing only a divine reality could create. And I really have enjoyed being a bystander along the way to be nourished by the joy that both of you bring to a friendship which is rare. And my dotage, so to speak, other friendships have come into my life, Rusty among them, and they really are divine gifts. And out of that comes much more than either one of you ever begin to put in it. So allowing the art to be a bond for you, but much more that you have then generated out of that, including the book itself, the journey that you took together. All those things make the life that we live today in a world that is crazy as it is very, very important and very meaningful. So thank you.
Well, thank
Next,
you, Barney.
so, sorry, I was just going to say we're going to do next image, but I meant to say that earlier.
Mm.
Well, it's been one of the greatest gifts of my life, and Marguerite has impacted my life in so many ways. I have a number of wonderful friends, but I look back and think about the impacts that she's had on my life, both personally and creatively. And yeah, you're right, Bernie. It's a gift.
Let's move to this. And Caroline, would you be willing to start our conversation about it?
Well, I'm glad that Marguerite explained the framing she did in the piece that was from Louisiana, because it looks like that was 1991, and here we're in 2024, and she's returned to something. I don't know if it was lace that framed it, that she monoprinted basically onto the edges, but it's nice to see that someone returned to something they love, or I don't know if she's continued to do it the entire time, but I think it speaks to enjoyment in the work that wouldn't be there otherwise if you try something and drop it. But it's framed this wonderful billowing snow that really contrasts with, I don't know what kind of trees these are because I didn't grow up around a lot of trees,
Fir
but
trees, yeah,
fir
fir trees.
fir trees, how they have this beautiful, it's not spindly, but you always see the trunk and you have these thick, beautiful, undulating kind of branches coming out, and how that plays with this heavy, thick snow. It catches that character of winter that, I mean, it is just magical as a winter wonderland, and how that plays with the warmness of either the sunrise or the sunset in the back. It's a wonderful piece in that way.
Marguerite?
The lace that I used to print the border on this is the same lace I used on the piece on Sacalay, the piece we saw earlier. It's just been in my art supplies all these years, and I get it out occasionally, and actually play with it, doing things on printing it on surfaces. But I did a couple of these larger. One is a autumn piece and this winter piece that just seemed to want to be framed and contained by the image that surrounds the piece, and it makes the glowing of the background just really pop out. It, like I said before, it'll flatten the piece out, bring the piece to the surface, but yet it's like opening up a window to look into the landscape itself.
Mara?
Okay, so this is a little bit nuts, given the scale of
Right.
this painting is 48 inches and it's a secular theme. But these remind me of, the great small but mighty, although they did do major altarpieces as well. Fra, Fra Angelico, Fra Lippo, Lippi. There's this framing, this in ornate, almost architectural, fabric-driven framing, and of course, in these small little icon paintings of the saints or the Virgin Mary and the Mother and Child Madonna, there was all this intricate gold work, and then there were one, two, or three, the Mother and Child, or the Pietà with one of the patron saints overlooking. But these just have that same, even though it's huge, that same relationship for me of something made precious, a moment, a sacred object, in this case, these three beautiful fir trees, laden with snow, glowing from the background. I don't know, this painting is sort of in okay, my faith tradition is Catholic. They're full of grace. That's usually capitalized.
Right.
So, this may be way off base, but they have that iconography for me of something holy.
Well,
Well, I think,
there's
right,
certainly the Trinity there if you want to make
right.
it. So it's interesting. I think Marguerite has talked about her technique. That all that snow is paper, unpainted. I assume, and it
Linen, just so
linen. I'm sorry, exactly.
And
And it gives it that feeling of cotton almost. This is a huge print, and it lights up the room. I mean, it emits light almost
yeah,
as you're near it. It lights up the room because of what was in the background. Where more traditionally you say, "Oh, this is winter. It'll be darker. It'll be something else." It's a wonderful contrast of this bright yellow and some orange that is just because it's the background. It just bursts forward and lights everything up. The other interesting thing you can see again, Marguerite has talked about her technique. But there's lots of drips that you can see that have come down, and it adds to the texture of the painting in a very delightful way, a way that you wouldn't necessarily see it from a distance. You don't notice it. Up close, you see it, and it's almost like, oh, there's something melting, or there's that aspect to it, which adds to the enjoyment.
And I saw actually, I'm looking out the office door, which is a window actually, or glass, and seeing the painting, and it is literally, to your point, Mara, a glow. It has a kind of luminosity that comes from the altarpieces that you're speaking about in a very profound way. Next slide, please. This is so, and I'm happy that we were able to have them juxtaposed with the lace and the framing, and then this particular piece. Marguerite, I'm going to ask you if you don't mind to speak about it, and then we'll move on to other thoughts as well. So this is again, 40 years ago.
you're right. Again, it's an early piece. It's a large piece. It was actually, this piece was painted, it's oil on paper. And I had done a small watercolor study and wanted to make it large, which working, instead of going right out in the landscape to work on the big piece, which is just impossible to take something this out, working from the small landscape that I did out plein air, it really reduces the detail. Blowing, something 4 inches by 5 inches up to something this size, it winnows down a lot of the superficial, a lot of the detail, so that you come up with shapes, spaces, areas of color that are really quite quiet and subdued. And I often work that way. I like to do a watercolor study to start out a larger painting, and it makes the larger painting pared down to the essentials.
Interesting. So this a form of reduction from
Mm.
small to large. Anyway, um, Caroline, can you speak just a bit about this? Because this is a totally different landscape as well from the ones we've been looking at.
It is totally different. It has a different quality, a different color that coming out to me. What I find so interesting, Marguerite was talking about paring down, almost becomes like a Rothko in a way, how it becomes these broad shapes and broad colors. But right kind of in the middle center, it keeps jumping out at me. There's these two hills with undulating trees, and then there's one tree coming out that's a little bit more specific, and then two kind of down the hill. It's interesting this play between general, beautiful, big, bold brushstrokes, and it gets a little more specific right in the center there. I think that really gives a lot of depth and motion to the piece. It also, with the perspective, going grayer to the background and more kind of washed out, there's this halo along there too, along the ridge that really makes that area shine and gives a lot more depth than just like if it was just a color study, it's not that. There's so much more to it.
And Rusty?
Well, it is such an interesting difference. There's not a central piece other than the color, the light, if you will. The central plane there becomes the centerpiece. And then if you walk up, as Caroline said, you walk up on that ridge and there's a reflection or a reproduction of that same light right up on that ridge. Around a small tree. And then there's another ridge in the background. And again, much as previous paintings, it's a wonderful capturing of a distance. It's a three-dimensional feeling that's achieved in a obviously two-dimensional object. So it's I think extremely difficult to do and not find it, not losing a sense of where you are. So we have a proximal area, intermediate area, a distal area, and they all feel like they merge or belong together. And that's, I think, the function of how Marguerite paints. It's a wonderful technique to be able to make the whole work as a distinct entity.
Mara, your thoughts?
Oh, I have to talk about Vermont. I look at a view similar to this every day. I face north by east. And in Vermont, I mean, it's just so Vermont to me how the land is operating and what she's distilled down to, because both Rusty and Carolyn talked about the top ridge where there's that little highlight around a tree, and then you've got this field, but in the dark behind that, there's some sort of outbuilding, farm, something, worked landscape on a plain. And if you look at any farm and ridge line at a certain time of day, as the western light starts slanting in, it's a different time of day, of course, in the summer than the winter, how the light hits and how there's always one glowing point up on the top ridge, and there's one great slanting light on the ground right in front of you. Vermont operates that way almost every single night. And this has been distilled down to the essence of how land and light interact in Vermont when you're facing north by northeast.
Marguerite?
I did this painting when I was a resident at the Vermont Studio Colony back in whenever it was. Yeah, right at 89 and 90. And when I went there, I was there for a month, and I told myself I was going to go out into the landscape and do a watercolor every day. And I pretty much did. Toward the end of the month, it was just getting um, not drudgery, but getting out there every day. I was doing other things in the studio, but I did almost 30 watercolors over the course of that month in plein air, and then I used those, like I said, to do a larger piece. Um, and the thinking that the landscape in Maine and Vermont are similar. They're similar, but there's so much more difference between the two of them. And being there it's not in this painting, but being there in April when the maple trees start to leaf out in Vermont, it turns the hills this sort of reddish purple color, which I keep wanting to see in Maine, but I don't. It doesn't happen in Maine, it happens in Vermont. But over the course of a month in April, the landscape changes so much and it changes daily. And that was just very exciting as a landscape painter to actually record that over the course of a month. It was a wonderful time to be in Vermont, and I did a lot of work there. I do have a funny story about this painting. It's oil on paper on a big sheet of gessoed watercolor paper, and I used to put grommets in the corners and push pin it to the wall. But eventually, the painting has to be more permanently framed or affixed. So this particular painting I did myself in the studio, where I coated the back of the painting with an adhesive and the surface of a piece of gessoed plywood with an adhesive, and then put the piece down and actually squeegeed it onto the surface, working very quickly. The adhesive dries quickly, and the paint is very thin, so there's no impasto paint on there. There's nothing sticking up, so it's a pretty flat surface. Well, I worked quickly, and I was so happy with it when I got through until I noticed that right in the middle of the piece, underneath that highlight on the ridge, there were like three bubbles in the paper that hadn't adhered. And I tried to decide how to deal with it because the adhesive was long dry. I happened to have a couple of EpiPens at the time because I was allergic to bee stings. So I took the EpiPens, filled them with the adhesive, and punctured the bubbles and inserted the adhesive and pressed it down. And it adhered. You don't see it unless you look at the painting from the side, and you just barely see a little leftover ridge of the bubbles.
So this is
Brilliant. Brilliant.
very good idea. It's been medically attended to, so
It
it's
has. It
excellent.
was cured, yes.
And if I
Yes.
can just very, very quickly, this painting has hung in Marguerite's home as long as I have known her. And I have to tell you, when those elevator doors to the gallery opened, and it's the first image you see, and look at the size of it, it is huge. It almost knocked me over. And we talked earlier before the webinar started about rotating your work, not just to make work, more available, but you start seeing it again in a different way. And even just sitting here staring at it on the screen, I am seeing this painting that I have known for 30 years in so many different ways now. So that's a real gift too.
It's a very interesting insight. It's also like reading a book that you read as a teenager and reading it as a 40-year-old and an 80-year-old. And you bring to it very different experiences. It brings to you something different, but you're also bringing something very different to it. Next image, please. So I wanted, actually, Liz, for you to speak a bit about Maine.
Well, again, these are memories. It's hard for me to divorce my personal connection to this landscape and Marguerite to the appreciation of the work as itself. I mean, this is the summer after my mother died. This is Walter. Walter and Marguerite and her friend Alex took me out in Walter's outboard up the Flagstaff Lake, and I sat in the bow, and tears streamed in my face. It was the one moment of comfort I had and it was just weeks after her death. So I see this painting and I fall into it emotionally. But what I love is when I had my young friend in the gallery, this is the first painting in the collection, and he was very taken by it. And we got all the way around again to the watercolor that we had looked at, the early watercolor that we were talking about in the winter landscape. And I asked him if there was a painting that he recognized the palette in. And this is a an MIT quantum physicist major, and he immediately called back to this painting. The palette between the two jumped out at him as much as it does to me. And for me, this is just such a deep, just such a landscape of the heart as much of the land.
Very beautifully said. Rusty?
Well, it's, maybe it belongs at the MFA with the other Winslow Homers. It's a wonderful, wonderful watercolor. Just for me, I looked at it initially and I thought, because thinking of canoes and things like that, and then I saw the engine and I went, there was something about it that to me, it just grabbed me because I expected it to be a canoe in the quiet waters. But beyond that, clearly the reflections, the capturing of the water. Again, there's probably no place in Maine that doesn't have a hill as a vista behind it. So there's the trees, there's the water, there's all the elements, main three elements: air, water, wind is implied, but just wonderful. And then just the touches. Again, this goes back to the swamp, but here again, right around the line in the water, there's a little rippling, and there's a little bit of rippling around the boat. All very beautifully and delicately done, but it's just a gorgeous composition.
Marguerite, does this go back to your earlier career doing illustration and then figuring out how to transfer that illustration, which is always very high end, to fine art?
Well, I started out as a technical illustrator for the oil and gas industry in Texas. And I would go out to a studio on the weekends outside of Houston to paint. And it was really hard for me to let go of that strong illustrative technique. And I have had over the years to try to be looser with the paint, looser with the compositions, and so that it doesn't look like an illustration. I'm a decent draftsman, so I have to kind of get away from drawing things exactly as I observe them and do more of a way that I feel about them than I'm actually observing them.
Interesting difference of approach to what you do. And I think this piece transitions those two worlds in a very beautiful way. Last image, and I'm going to ask Laura if you would begin with our conversation with it, please.
Okay. So this painting, because I was the one who chose the paintings, intrigued me because I feel this serpentine pattern is nothing I've ever seen before. And it, I don't know, it entangled me in the landscape in a very different way than the vistas or the solo tree operated in terms of the figure ground relationship and in terms of where I'm placed in the painting. I almost felt in this painting I wasn't on a shore, I was in the water or swamp or in waders if I were a fisherman, which I am not. And that I feel as though I'm entangled in this incredible landscape, and as if it's pulling me into the moon. So it was just my placement felt very different in this painting. And although it is not thickly painted, there's an opacity to this paint that is very different than the watercolor feeling of both the oil paints and, of course, the watercolor itself. And it's, I don't know, it's mysterious in a different way. It doesn't like let me fall into the painting or let me, breathe open. It pulls me this way. So I don't know. It had a more mysterious. I can't think of the right word right now.
Well, let somebody else talk, and then if you
Yeah.
get it, just shout it out.
Okay.
So, Caroline?
This one, I mean, I think I remember last webinar there was Mercy Moon, and it featured probably some, I assume, a similar location, right, in Louisiana.
This
But
this is in my backyard in Louisiana,
is
and 2 blocks from a large Catholic parish, which is Lady of Mercy.
oh,
So it looks we're looking east and seeing the moon rise, and I always call it the Mercy Moon because it rises over the Catholic Church.
well, it has such, I think what Mara was maybe pointing at with that eye sense, I almost feel it reminds me of a Midsummer Night's Dream that has this playfulness and this fairy tale character to it. I think what makes it so playful are these little dancing reeds that almost pop off the canvas, as well as the moon, because the moon is it's almost sitting there like I can grab it. And it gives this kind of this playfulness, this, like the little characters are teasing around the composition. And I mean, it is just magical. And I think that's at nighttime too. And you see these playful dancing vines that you wouldn't see anywhere else except for probably Louisiana and a handful of other places, if that. Yeah, that's what reminds me of Midsummer Night's Dream.
Well, that really gets sort of where I was going with it. I feel like I've been enchanted.
Yeah, yeah.
Not that this is an enchanting landscape, but it enchants you in the fairy tale or the Midsummer Night's Dream meaning of enchantment.
And Rusty?
Well, I have many of you may have grandchildren, and I've been looking at a lot of children's books, and this somehow reminds me a little bit of what an illustration might be. And why does it do that? Because you're engaging the children's minds, their sense of the new and exciting, and it sort of feels that way. Going back to the cypress tree again, there is a sense in those areas that you are sort of tied up within it, pulled into it, as opposed to standing back and looking at fabulous landscapes with multiple layers of hills behind. When you're down in Louisiana and get down in the bayou or you get down in these waters, you sometimes feel like the branches are grabbing you. And there is a sense of being a part of it that you can't escape. I mean, you're getting pulled in. So lovely done. I think the branches of the trees, and if assuming it's a vine, but it may be a branch, whatever that is that's growing out, it's all very, is snake-like. Let's just say it that way. But it's very different than the lines. So many of the lines on the Maine and Vermont landscapes, and the reeds, as Carolyn pointed out, they're all bring about a very different sense, but still a wonderful and very creative one.
So
And
let me, probably you go ahead.
I want to, one thing that hasn't come up that I think is so, again, important about Marguerite's process, and she's touched upon it several times through this, is, oh, this is from my backyard. Oh, this is from my window. Oh, this is from the highway a ways up on the way to the Pines gas station. You think about the artistic process and the artists having to traipse out into, exotic landscapes. And Marguerite works with the materials that are closest to her heart and closest to her eye. So many of these paintings are within walking distance of her front dooryard, as we say up in Maine. And the way that she can interpret the landscape and interpret nature around her bespeaks the ability to not have to be the exotic painter globetrotting, even though she has and she does, and she's painted all over the world. She finds beauty wherever she lands.
Nicely said. I think the notion of intimacy is something that you're talking about in terms of what Marguerite brings to each and every one of the works. So I'll end with a quote from Thomas, beside thanking each one of you. We all share a creative goal with art. The goal is difficult. It is an invitation to change the world. And I would argue that Marguerite helps us change at least how we see the world. Whether or not, in fact, the art itself will change the world is pretty much up to us. So thank you all. Happy holidays. Thank you.